Hello and welcome to the Foundation Center's Your Board and Fundraising webinar. My name is Caroline Herbert. I'm the manager of multimedia training for the Foundation Center. And if you're not familiar with us, we're a national nonprofit organization. We've been around since 1956, and our mission is to strengthen the social sector by advancing knowledge about philanthropy in the U.S. and around the world. And in this class, we're going to be talking about a very specific aspect of philanthropy, how to engage a board of directors in fundraising. So the purpose of the class is to systematically think through the process of getting board members more involved with fundraising activities. So we'll cover several main topics, starting with a little bit of an introduction in terms of why are boards important. Why do nonprofits have boards? What are their top responsibilities? And what characteristics make up an effective board? And of course, we'll be looking at how fundraising fits into the bigger picture. Then we'll move into our main topic for the session, talking about specific ways board members can become involved with fundraising. And then the reality that maybe not every board member is engaged with fundraising, so we'll talk about why that may be and how you can turn it around. And then we'll finish up with talking more about creating structures to ensure, going into the future, the board members will be engaged, and talk a little bit more about recruitment and orientation for board members. So we're going to start out talking about, in the bigger picture, the role of the nonprofit board and why boards are important and what they do overall, and then focus in on how fundraising fits. So here's a quick definition of a board from the Association of Fundraising Professionals. And the board is fundamentally responsible for defining the organization's mission and goals, and they hold the ultimate authority for governance, oversight, and public accountability for a nonprofit. So let's break down their overall areas of work and responsibilities. And we do have a URL on the screen. BoardSource is one of the leading organizations thinking about governance issues in the nonprofit sector. So we're going to cite them a lot. And we are citing them here because they publish they have some publications on the responsibilities of nonprofit boards. We're kind of summarizing a lot of that information here. So here are some of the key areas of board work. In other words, what they're going to spend their time on. So legal and fiduciary. The board ensures that the organization is operating according to the law within the framework of your mission. They also ensure the legal and ethical integrity and maintain the accountability for the organization. So earning and maintaining the public trust is a key indicator that the board has fulfilled its governance role. And we can also think about fundraising responsibilities as tied to fiduciary responsibilities. So it's being a good steward of the nonprofit's finances and also helping the nonprofit to bring in resources. So some of the other specific financial responsibilities related to finance and fundraising would be approval of the budget, approving the fundraising plan, and certainly there are many different stages of board development. So if you're with maybe a startup organization, you may have a working board where you don't have any paid professional staff and the board members are doing everything. So they may be creating the budget, creating the fundraising plan, not just approving it. And there's also, besides approving the budget, there's the ongoing review and monitoring of finances. Oversight, the board ensures the proper management of the organization essentially through its management of the chief executive. So the board is hiring, evaluating, if necessary, removing one individual, the executive director, the chief executive, who then manages the organization. So personnel could take up a lot of their time if they have to hire a new executive director. if the executive director, if there's a leadership transition. Strategic planning. So the board is also looking at the strategic vision of the organization, ensuring the effective organizational planning, translating the mission into the broad goals and objectives, and determine how they can strengthen or expand the organization's programs. And the board is also the public face of the organization, representing the organization in the community. So they work towards increasing the visibility of the nonprofit, advocate on behalf of the organization, and through the board, the community have a voice in the governance of the organization. Board members are often appointed to bring their experience, to represent different perspectives, and to prevent the insularity. So typically, if you think of how board members are spending their time, it's oversight, strategic planning, fundraising, possibly personnel issues. So a lot that they do besides the fundraising, although that is a very important part of their responsibilities. So we've summed this up into the three Ds, the three duties of board service. So operating according to the law, the duty of care, avoiding the conflicts of interest. So if you serve on a nonprofit board, you're putting the interests of the organization above your own personal interests, and you are obedient to the mission. Help the organization stay true to its mission. And the next slide is a list of many characteristics that could be used to describe an effective board. So I think certainly the first, commitment to the mission. It should go without saying, if you don't have board members that are committed to the work of the organization, it's going to be hard for them to do anything, let alone get involved in fundraising. Also being strategic, having the strategic thinking, so not necessarily getting bogged down into all the minutiae of running the organization, not being micromanagers, but really looking at the strategic direction. And being independent-minded in terms of decision-making and putting the interests of the organization above all else. And, questioning. So we have a culture of asking questions, not being the rubber stamp board. And the transparency, so transparency in terms of their own actions, but also the actions of the organization. And of course, I know many of us would focus on the finding and sustaining resources, in other words, fundraising, as a key characteristic of an effective board. And then being results-oriented and related to fundraising, committed to expanding your circle of friends, so networking on behalf of the organization, relationship building on behalf of the organization. All right, well, now that we've gone over this little intro in terms of the overall work of the board and how they're effective, we're going to move into our main topic for today, which is boards and fundraising and engagement. And we're going to start with an important first step in fundraising, which is giving personal financial contributions themselves. And I believe that if you are expecting board members to go out and fundraise, and by that you probably mean go out and ask other people to support the organization, they're not going to be very credible as fundraisers if they themselves are not already donors. So I think the best fundraisers are donors to the organization, and I would argue that no, it's not enough that you're sitting on the board. It's wonderful that you're such a high-level volunteer and on the board of the organization, but that's not the same. It doesn't take the place of making a personal financial contribution. So it's an essential act of commitment to the organization, no matter how small the donation. And board members need to understand that external donors will ask about this. I'm hearing more and more from foundations asking questions about what percentage of your board is giving, and that is looked at as really a key measurement of the board's involvement. And I think if you don't have 100% board giving. You're not going to be very competitive if you're going out looking for foundation fundraising, especially. I would also say corporate donations. Corporate leaders are going to ask about this, and raising money from individuals as well. If you have board members like I said, going out asking their friends and family for donations, and the person they're asking says, okay, well, how much are you giving? They say nothing. That doesn't really sound too good. So like, well, why should I give if you're not giving anything? Now, what about the dollar amount? I mean, this is a big question. Should you set a minimum amount? Some organizations can get away with that. It works in their culture that they have board members who are comfortable with giving at a certain amount. I wouldn't make a blanket recommendation. It may or may not make sense. If you have a lot of economic diversity, if you want a lot of economic diversity on your board, it may backfire. So I would emphasize more that everyone's giving a significant amount relative to their means. So what is a significant amount for each individual, rather than setting a ceiling, or a floor rather. You don't want a ceiling. That it could backfire in that if you have okay, our minimum amount is $1,000, and you have someone who potentially could give more, they may not if they see that the requirement is only $1,000. So it can work against you in different ways. And this is, if you think about the role of other board members, the role of staff people, I'd say fundraising really should be peer-to-peer. So the chair of the board, or if you have a development committee of the board, the person running that, in other words, a board member, a leader on the board, is really going to be taking the lead in talking to all of his or her colleagues about their annual commitment. With the cooperation, of course, with working with the executive director, director of development, if you have one in your organization, but it's not solely the staff person who's going out and having these conversations with each board member. I mean, certainly it's the development director who's going to be working behind the scenes with the record keeping and following up if board members are making pledges, but a board member does need to be involved in the initial asking and setting the pledge amount for each board member, which typically may be done at the beginning of the year. How much do you plan to give this year? Do you want to pay in one lump sum or in installments? However you want to do it. I mean, I think we need to be, you want to be as flexible as possible. So that is really a key first step. I would say before you can expect a board member to go out and do any of this other stuff, if you have an issue with board giving that you know it's not where you'd like it to be, I think that would be your main focus to start out. But beyond giving personally, so once they've made their own personal contributions, then yes, you also want to think about them going out in the community and asking others. So when we say we want the board to fundraise, usually what we're talking about is going out and asking other people, so asking their peers for support. And just to get back to the important their credibility as fundraisers, being able to say something like, this nonprofit is doing very important work. I've given at this amount, and I'm asking you to join me. Something like that carries a lot more weight. Being able to say, this is my investment, my contribution. Please join me. So volunteers asking for a gift can be more powerful than the staff person asking for a gift, but often you are working as a team. So a board member may not be comfortable doing this by themselves, and they shouldn't be you shouldn't expect that. I mean, it's great if you have board members who have a very high comfort level with fundraising, but often you don't. So this usually is a team effort because a board member has the contacts and may be looking to a staff person for the expertise. So it's the combination of the expertise in the organization, the expertise in fundraising, and the relationships. So making introductions, going together to visit key donors if they're not comfortable asking themselves. And I think when you're talking about board involvement in fundraising, you really need to think about each individual's strengths. It's not one size fits all, and that, oh, everyone is expected to go out and ask 5 of their friends for donations, and everyone's expected to make presentations in front of their membership associations. I mean, the person who would never in a million years want to go out, approach friends one-on-one to ask for money is perfectly comfortable getting up in front of the congregation on Sunday and giving a pitch at their church. The person who has no trouble going and asking their friends for money one-on-one would never in a million years want to get up and speak in front of a group. So everyone has their own strength, their own fears, so you need to think what's going to work. But the group settings, and if you do have members very active in, I use the example of the faith community, associations like Chamber of Commerce, Rotary, other community groups where it's acceptable for people to get up and talk about organizations they're involved with. That can be a great way for board members to reach a lot of people. Then there's also the house party fundraising vehicle, which is where a board member hosts a gathering, whether it's a dinner, cocktail party, something like that, and all board members are encouraged or required, depending on how you want to do it, to invite a certain number of people. And the traditional way this is done, the way you want it to work from the nonprofit's perspective, is that the board members cover all the costs. You're not spending any money. The board member, the host, is inviting people, making it clear that it's talking about the organization. You're not doing a bait and switch, telling people, oh, yes, come to my cocktail party, and then we're going to ask you for money. So, very clear that this is a gathering on behalf of the XYZ nonprofit. So at a house party, the host can say a few words if they're comfortable. If not, the chair of the board, if it's a different person, your executive director, program leaders, whoever you want to put forward as your most articulate spokesperson to make a very short presentation about the program, and really it's more informal. And you can think of this in a couple different ways. You can think of it as a cultivation event, and that you're not going to be sitting there passing the hat that evening. You are going to follow up with people and you send them more information and eventually ask them for a gift. Or you could turn it into a fundraising event right then and there and ask people for donations on the spot. There's no one way you have to do it. All right, so now that we know what board members could be doing, the reality often is that they're not engaged in fundraising. So why not? On this slide, we have a number of common reasons that you may have heard already. Certainly the lack of experience and the skills. A lot of these reasons kind of go together. That, okay, we don't know how. We don't have that technical expertise. That's why we hired you. I mean, you hear that over and over again. We don't know what the fundraising plan is or what the goals are. I mean, we don't, just not really even fulfilling their key fiduciary duties. So this could be a more serious problem if they really don't understand the financials or the finances or how you're paying for things. They may not understand the connection between, the work they love, the money, and why it's so important for them to fundraise and the private fundraising efforts. So you never had to do it before. No one asked me to do this before, are common reasons. And if you're trying to change the culture of your organization and move into private fundraising, if you haven't done it before, yes, it is a major culture change and a major shock to the system. So, good example of this, where I'm based in Washington, D.C., I hear this a lot from organizations that have been very dependent on government funding, traditionally. And maybe they still are, but they are looking at current trends and wondering how long it's going to last. Or maybe you've been dependent on state or local government funding, which has been cut. You see the writing on the wall, and you have to diversify, and you're looking to private fundraising. So if you're trying to raise money from individuals or foundations or corporations for the first time, and you don't have this culture of board giving or board fundraising, it is a long-term process to make this change. And you may very well hear, well, we didn't have to do this before. You're right. We were getting a lot of government contracts and government grants, and they didn't really care about board giving. But now we're looking at foundations, and they do care about board giving. Or we're trying to raise money from individuals, and that includes you and your contacts. So it may be, if you're a staff person, it may be the long-term education process. This is where we've been, this is where we're going, this is why things need to change. And certainly fear is a big factor, the fear factor. And this is, of course, very popular. I'm too busy. I have too many other commitments. And too many other commitments, it may, if it's, I'm raising money for a lot of other organizations, that really may be an issue with that duty of loyalty, remember, with conflicts of interest. So, if you get someone who's, I'm so busy I can't do anything for you because I'm working for all these other organizations, you got to wonder, if they're overcommitted. We are not a priority. Ideally, everyone on your board, your nonprofit should be one of their priorities in terms of giving and involvement. And if you're not, it may be a situation where you have to think about, should they step down? All right, so let's think about how we turn this around and dispelling the fears. I'm highlighting cultivation and stewardship and really thinking about the role that board members play. So if we think about the excuse of, well, I'm afraid and I don't know how to do that, you know how to do that. Say, okay, yes, that's very true. We may have fundraising experts on staff, but the staff people working for the organization, you may have technical expertise, but you don't necessarily have all the relationships, the networks of your board members. So it's really the combination of the technical expertise and the networks. So we really need you, the board members, to help us make these contacts and open the door. So I think if you're the fundraiser or anyone on staff, you should do as much as you can to support the board members in terms of providing talking points, written documentation, your case for support, write the letters for them, talking points for phone calls, going with them on meetings, as we already discussed. But really, I think board members, if they're so afraid of the asking, when we say fundraising, they think, asking my friends for money, I will not do that. But I would argue that where we really need board members to be involved is in the cultivation. Asking for a donation is one point in time. There's a lot that goes on before that happens, because if you're, especially if you want a significant donation, that's usually not going to happen when you're asking someone for the first time and they have no exposure to your organization. So board members can really help in terms of educating, talking up the organization to their contacts, inviting contacts to events, not necessarily even fundraising events, but getting them involved in other aspects of the organization's work before they are asked to contribute. And then stewardship, what happens when someone's already donated. And board members, again, if their contact makes a donation, keep that person in the loop, keep them informed about the organization's work. And also, the education in terms of the planning process. So, if they're saying, well, we don't know anything about the fundraising plan or why you need us to contribute, You need to do a lot of work to educate them. Well, this is how we're supported, and making the mission money connection. If we're saying that they have the passion and commitment to the mission, these are the programs you really care about, this is how they're paid for, this is why we need your support and your help with fundraising. And it is, as I've already said, a long-term process to change the board culture. It could be, up to a year or more to really turn around, board. If they're not contributing themselves, they're not involved in fundraising, it's not going to happen overnight. And you really need, if you're a staff person, as you know, you need a champion on the board, because if you don't have any advocates actually on the board, if it's just you, the staff person, from the outside, so to speak, you're not going to be as successful. If you do have a board member who's willing to put forward something like this, a new board contract, or a board contract from in the first place if you don't already have one. So this is an example of the kind of agreement a board member would sign off on when they join and then renewed every year. And there are a couple things related to fundraising. Number 4, I will give what for me is a substantial financial donation. Number 5, I will actively engage in fundraising for this organization. Then, of course, we could argue all of these are related to fundraising in terms of actively promote the organization, understanding, fiscal responsibility, etc. All right, so if you don't already have something like this, or if you want to change it, what you already have, you definitely need a board member to agree that, yes, we want to do this, because they have to put it forward. You make a motion that the board accepts this. And if you're doing this, think about your strategy for providing a graceful exit for people. Because you have to be prepared. If this is a serious change in the culture, if you didn't have these kinds of requirements before, you may very well have people on the board who are not, don't feel comfortable making this commitment, which is totally okay. Not every committed volunteer needs to be on your governing board. There are a lot of other things that a committed volunteer could do for your organization. So a lot of organizations, and talking about that excuse of I'm too busy to get involved, creating task forces. So short-term, maybe deadline-oriented. Help us plan this house party or this special event, or for our end-of-the-year giving, we're doing an annual appeal mailing. Will you help organize that? That can be board members that commit to these short-term projects. Could also be other volunteers. So it's not necessarily just people on the board who are going to be doing this. So think about, if you do have people who don't want to move forward, are not going to sign on to this, would you set up an emeritus board, an advisory committee, some way where they, you can honor their commitment and keep them involved, and have a plan for how you'd handle that so you're not alienating people. But if you do have the board members that sign off on this, then it's up to the board to decide what their timeline is for implementing this. If it's the number 4 is a new category where they haven't had to give before, are you going to set up, you have a certain amount of time, this starts next year, this starts immediately. So you're going to think through all this with the board members. Now, how do they actively engage in fundraising? We've been talking about this already in terms of ways they could help us besides asking for money, but here's a long list of suggestions, because you're still going to have, even if you have people sign off on this contract, I don't want to ask anyone for money. Well, that's fine. You don't have to ask anyone for money, because usually they mean what they're thinking of is the face-to-face, one-on-one asking. Well, would you be willing to share a few names to put in our mailing list and write some personal notes? we're sending an annual appeal, the year-end holiday appeal. Would you be willing to sign off on some letters to your contacts? Would you be willing to send an email to friends asking for support at year-end? Put something on your Facebook page. Things like that may be less intimidating than, talking to people face-to-face. But if you have people who aren't even willing to send emails, okay, well, can you suggest some names for our contact list? Do you have contacts at foundations or corporations where you could help us get a meeting? Things like that. Getting involved in the thanking, so the stewardship process. Okay, well, we're not going to ask you to solicit any contributions. Here are 5 names of people who recently donated. We've already thanked them, the executive director, but it would mean a lot if they got a personal note from a board member thanking them, or even a phone call to thank them for their contribution. Not ask them for money, but tell them about how important their gift is and what we're able to do with their support. And then there's also the people who, again, may not be comfortable asking for money, have no problem working their contacts to get non-monetary donations. Now, I don't think this question does come up. Well, I have someone who's giving in-kind, can arrange an in-kind contribution from a company, but they don't want to make a personal financial contribution. Or is that the same? Personally, I do not think so. I think when we're saying personal financial contribution, it literally means from your own pocket, not getting your company to donate or donating products. However, I'd say if there's a line item in your budget, we budgeted for buying computers this year, and you have a board member come in and says, okay, I'll buy you all computers, and that's money that you wouldn't spend otherwise, then that could be an important contribution. I think you'd have to set up, again, at the board level, set up policies in terms of what may be acceptable. Often, we are, from the staff's point of view, this is something you'd want to help educate the board members on. Their personal financial contributions of dollars can be very powerful if they're unrestricted gifts to help pay for overhead administrative costs, which are so important to building your capacity. So that would be an argument against a board member making a very specific kind of contribution. I'm going to pay for this. The unrestricted support may be more valuable. Certainly support volunteering in terms of supporting special events, being out there as an advocate. Other expertise areas, do they know about marketing, writing, communications, technology, things like that could help support the fundraising program. And this last slide in this section is just a sample of a more specific commitment. This would be an annual fundraising commitment form. So this is, and of course you would have to adapt this to what you do, but essentially this is what the organization, or this is what the individual would commit to doing specific to fundraising. So this could go along with that overall contract. And looking forward, board recruitment is an ongoing process. It's not just, oh, we have some vacancies, quick, let's go out and find some new people. Really, you're constantly out there looking for people doing good work, people who are involved in your organization who could potentially get more involved. I said earlier, not every committed volunteer needs to be on your governing board, but you're looking for those committed volunteers or existing donors or leaders in the community who you think may be interested in board service and have something to contribute. So in terms of what you're looking for, in terms of a new board member, I think the first two, actually probably the first three, are things you'd be looking for in every individual. Definitely the commitment to the mission and having time. I think we had in that agreement letter, I will come to board meetings. So if they can't even fulfill that part of the commitment, if they tell you up front, I don't have time, take them at their word. Contacts in the community, you could be looking for a lot of different things. Where do you need the contacts? So I think board recruitment, in terms of what you're going to be looking for, it all starts with what is the organization trying to do? What is your strategic plan? And that could suggest, your strategic plans could suggest recruitment areas. For example, we are based in one city in a metropolitan area, and we've been providing services in City A. And we really want to expand to City B or into the suburbs or whatever. But all of our board members live in City A. So we need more geographic diversity if we're really going to operate in this new part of our metropolitan area. You could be looking for diversity in terms of employment. Like all of our board members work in the public sector or the nonprofit sector, and we want people who work in the corporate sector because we're looking for corporate donations. We are looking for more diversity in terms of age, gender, race, ethnicity, fill in the blank. So I think a lot of it depends on, what do you need? What does the organization need? What do you already have? What gaps do you see? And I think the last one, the ability to listen and play well with others, is also one of those non-negotiables. And I think the personal wealth or connection to wealth, ideally you'd look for some people who have those connections or are themselves wealthy. But as we've already said, I don't think that should be stopping point where, we don't know any wealthy people, therefore we can't recruit anybody. And I think this is all a combination of things. So you're not going to find all of these characteristics in one person, but you're figuring out your mix. And I think many of us go internally to find new board members, so it's referrals from people already on the board. Certainly staff, especially development staff, you have a big role to play here in terms of looking at potential board members. And certainly looking at people who have already made some kind of commitment to the organization. And just as you're looking for prospects to donate and to give more money, you may be looking for prospects to volunteer for board service. So they may already be volunteering or already donating. Could they be a candidate for board service? Now, if you're looking at prospects from the general population, and if you're putting out a call for nominations in your newsletter, on your website, something like that, you do need to think about your screening process, if you're going to have an application. I would look at, we have a couple of websites on the screen there. One is Points of Light that runs the national hands-on network, and I'm typing it on the screen. And if you go to pointsoflight.org, you'll find a link for the hands-on network. That's a national network of volunteer centers. And there's probably one in your community, in your state. These are organizations that do volunteer match. So the organization says, this is what we're looking for in terms of volunteers, and then volunteers come there to look for opportunities, and you're matched up. And they often have board matching programs. So maybe you could look to them for, if they have people who are looking to serve on boards. Often corporations look to these volunteer bureaus to help them if they have employees that want to be placed on nonprofit boards, because often corporations see that as a way to develop leadership skills among their employees. I also have a link there for the BoardNet USA, which is a national board matching program. Now, these are really like dating services. They're making an introduction. You still need to do the work of really recruiting and making the case for your organization. And once you have someone agree to serve on the board, this could be a long-term process to get to know the organization, you have a meeting with the executive director, the development director, chair of the board, maybe attend part of a board meeting. So it could be a long-term get-to-know-you process. But once they make the commitment, you have, at this point, you do have the board agreement letter they're signing on to. You have the orientation, which is not just orientation to the organization, but also to board service. So presenting them with, bylaws, policies of the board, and usually pairing people up. So a new board member paired up with a existing experienced board member to act as a mentor. And thinking about some kind of trial period for the benefit of both parties. I mean, I think doing like a 3-month check-in to say, is this working for you? Is it working for us? So if there are any issues where it's really not a good fit, right away, and you can decide, do we want to move forward? What could we do to make this a better experience for the person? And what could we do moving forward? Or should we just say, this isn't going to work? And we do have a number of resources available for more information. I'm just going to do a quick tour of our GrantSpace website, grantspace.org, where we have some skill areas, including, if you go to the skill areas, there's a board skill set area. So I'll go to that. We have some multimedia, podcasts, videos. You also end up linking to frequently asked questions, which takes you to this knowledge base, part of grantspace.org, which is under the tools section. And there is a knowledge base topic area for boards. So all the questions related to nonprofit boards are here. So how can I learn about developing my board? Reference to this webinar, but some other resources as well. And if you do have questions that aren't answered by the knowledge base and the frequently asked questions, we do have the online service called Ask Us, which allows you to chat live with one of our librarians or to send in an email reference. And also to follow up, you can get the handouts for this webinar from this website, which will include the slide presentation, everything I just showed you, as well as a resource list, that board agreement letter, and also that fundraising commitment template form for you to work with. So I want to thank you for attending today. Wish you success in your fundraising, and have a great rest of your day.